If you knew exactly how long you had to live, would you have any regrets? I definitely would, and I think the same is true of most people. However, a select few seem to leave this world without any regrets whatsoever, believing that they've lived the most righteous life that they could have. One such person, I think, is Edith Piaf, a famous French singer who, in 1960, only 3 years before her eventual death, released what is arguably her most famous song, in which she stated simply, "Non, je ne regrette rien," which quite literally translates to, "No, I regret nothing." And while it might seem obvious that Grammy Award-winning artist wouldn't have too many regrets, that conclusion becomes a lot less obvious when we take a look at what her life was actually like. Edith, by most standards, led a pretty extraordinary life, but also one that was really tough. Abandoned by her mother, she only had one parent to rely on, who unfortunately would be forced to leave her to fight in the First World War. And so, as a child, she ended up in the refuge of her grandmother. Her life was full of illness and injury. She was blind for a significant part of her childhood, but would later recover, seemingly miraculously. Throughout her life, she would battle addiction and face repeated bereavement. She would lose partners, family, and even her own daughter, who passed away at just 2 years old. But despite this, she would go from singing on the streets and in nightclubs to an audience of none, to being internationally recognised and becoming a French icon. Leading up to her passing from cancer in 1963, she lived a life that was filled with great success, but arguably with even greater hardships. And yet, she came out of the other side professing, "Non, je ne regrette rien." But why? Well, we don't have to look too far to answer that question, because it's not the first time it's been asked. For a long time, people have contemplated the idea of their own mortality. For example, the Greek philosopher Democritus would regularly visit tombs and graveyards in order to ponder the idea. And in more recent times, we have people like Gary Vee who would say, well, let me just show you what he says.
Who do you love the most in the world?
My family.
Good. Who in your family? Pick one.
All of them.
Every day, make literally once a day, genuinely sit there for 5 minutes and make pretend one of them got shot in the face.
That's a bit much if you ask me. But there is a problem with the way that we view the idea of living a life without regret. For most of us, we look towards the living, those who are living lives that we believe we want, and we look to bridge the gap between their lives and ours. And we deny ourselves the fact that those who we believe to be successful don't have any more privileged access towards living a life without any regret. And that's what this lady, Bronnie Ware, realised. For a significant part of her career, Bronnie Ware worked as a palliative care nurse, taking care of people who were in their final months or even weeks of life. People who could truly reflect without the bother of day-to-day life in the way. While many of Bronnie Ware's patients seemed to genuinely have no regrets, many others did, and they voiced the same regrets over and over again. She compiled these in her book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Some of these were more abstract and others were more practical, and I want to see if I can apply these lessons in my own life and determine whether or not I feel any closer to living a life without regret. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. Okay, so I don't have that many friends and I spend most of my time alone, by choice usually. But I think this is the easiest one for most people to relate to. As we get older, we're no longer forced to literally spend hours every day with our friends as we would in school. Priorities shift, financial commitments become more important, and it becomes harder and harder to maintain those relationships. A few days without talking to someone quickly becomes a few weeks, which becomes years and decades. And before you know it, people who were once your best friends may as well be strangers to you. But thankfully, this is one I can actually do something about.
Can't take your call right now.
Just leave your message after the tone. Welcome to the EE voicemail. I'm sorry, but the person you called...
Hello?
Hey,
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm very, very good, yeah. I've been trying to call people and no one's answering my calls. It's so sad.
My phone was on fire. I didn't even get the notification on like my front screen until I went into WhatsApp.
But you called me back, so you're clearly the realest of friends.
No, I was like, if he's on a call with someone else, like, that's the worst thing ever.
So I tried to call a few different friends, but only one of them actually answered. But that was more than enough for me. As I said, I don't have too many close friends. And I can see, even just after that one call, why someone would regret not keeping in touch with their friends. Even just a relatively short conversation, like the one I had with my friend, really just lifted my spirits, you know? It makes me feel like a lot of the things that I've been worried about or concerned about aren't necessarily as important as I might have thought. And it just gives me that sense of mental clarity and of peace and gratitude for what I already have. And so this is one that has definitely, even tonight, already improved my life ever so slightly. But let's move on to the next one and we'll talk about that. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. If you're anything like me, this one might provoke a bit of a knee-jerk reaction because, well, it's pretty hard to make it by these days. But I think this is a good situation to apply the principle of charity and really look at the strongest possible version of Bronnie Ware's patient's argument. And that might help us to understand them a little bit more. The people who expressed these concerns were, well, people who had dependents, whether it be a partner or children, but put their material needs above the emotional side. And these were people who felt like they'd spend significant periods of time not really acknowledging what it was that mattered to their wives, husbands, and children. And if you're watching this, then you probably, like me, have a lot of working years ahead of you. And we don't really have too much of a choice in the matter. But we do have some other choices. We have the choice to not overvalue material needs at the expense of emotional ones, because they are just as important. On a more positive note, I think this is one that people are becoming more aware of, with trends like quiet quitting beginning to take hold. Many people are beginning to realise that taking additional work home and doing effectively unpaid overtime might not actually be adding to theirs and their families' lives. And I think that's a good thing. I like that. And honestly, this point, like the final 3 points in Bronnie Ware's book, reflect an overarching theme, really. The final 3 regrets that Bronnie's patients listed were the courage to express feelings, the courage to live a life true to one's desires, and the courage to let oneself be happier. And they all fall under this theme of courage. In fact, you've probably heard the common phrase, you'll regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did. But I think it goes a bit deeper than that. The things we truly regret are not the things that we believe we ought to do, like duties and responsibilities, because usually we can take steps to amend those whenever we feel like we've fallen short of a standard. Our ideals and our objectives, our goals, those are the ones that create more enduring regrets. As this research paper puts it, people are more likely to regret not being all that they could have been, rather than not being all that they should have been. These ideal-related regrets are the ones for which there is rarely a silver lining, the ones that we remember more intensely, and the ones for which we don't really have a proper coping mechanism. And so it's not that surprising that even in middle age, if people make significant career or life decisions that are more aligned with them, then they end up showing better signs of physical and mental well-being. And so, as helpful as this exercise was, I don't think I'll be able to live a truly regret-free life just by trying to follow a checklist. We can take lessons from those who've tread the path of life before us, and ask ourselves the questions that they may have failed to do when they had more time. It ultimately requires learning courage, learning to stand up for oneself and take baby steps towards our ideal selves, rather than sacrificing it on the altar of the person we believe that we ought to be. Hey team, just want to say thank you to Daniel, Alfie, Stephen, Blueberry, Sarah, Khan, Chris and Michael for supporting me on Patreon. Super duper grateful and highly appreciate it. Bye bye.